all, everybody online as well. I don't know how many people we have today online, but my name is Alain Barker, and hopefully the audio situation has now settled into a good place. I want to thank everybody who over the weekend helped work on putting the audio back together again for our meetings. So I think that we're in good shape. So yes, I'm very, very happy to see you all here. This morning at about 7:40 a.m. was the full moon. I don't know if you know that. Unfortunately, as I walked my dog Jazzy, I didn't see it and it was cold. But this is a particularly poetic moon that I want to just spend a few minutes talking about. The in the Native American northern ancestors knew this as the crow moon because of the cawing, the sounds of crows as they signaled the end of winter. Other northern names were the crust moon, because the snow cover became crusted with the thawing, as we can imagine, or the sap moon, a time for maple trees, for tapping into maple trees. In the southern, the ancestors called it the worm moon, after the earthworm cast that appeared on the ground after it thawed. A European name, as you probably all know, is the Lenten moon, corresponding with Lent, the period of fasting that precedes Easter. This moon also corresponds with Purim, which is celebrated on the 14th day of Adar in the Hebrew calendar. We're in the middle of Purim today, this lunchtime, which marks at sunset, which began at sunset yesterday and continues through sundown today. It's a holiday that marks the Jewish people's deliverance from the royal death decree around the 4th century BCE, as told in the book of Esther. Purim is celebrated by exchanging gifts of food, drink, feasting, and donating to charity. The moon will forever be a blessing to all people on our shared planet. Okay, I'm going to invite Roy to come and join me at the podium here. Roy Graham is a fabulous new member of the club, and he is going to speak to us a little bit. Thank you.
This is a terrific story I've heard and repeated many times, but I won't introduce it. Let me just start. Everything is for the good, even rats are for the good. This story involves a man named Peter, and his family had like maybe 12 children. And the story is told, this was a few hundred years ago in Eastern Europe, of course, before we had trains and everything else. And so Peter was very fortunate to purchase the only business in town. And this was a little village. And the only business in town was a tavern. And the reason the tavern was for sale is because the owners were drunks and it fell into disrepair. The only other business in town, of course, if you call it a business, was the court system, the furrier for horses, and the post office. So Peter moved his family there and was very successful very quickly. And all of a sudden, the townspeople were very upset because they no longer had the drunks running the bar. So they decided that they were going to sabotage him. And what they did is they said, he's breaking the law. He's shorting everyone on the drinks, and he's not paying his taxes. So what happened is the prosecutor got wind of it. And of course, he was a drunk too. And they prosecuted him, and they indicted him. And he was beside himself. He didn't know what to do. So he talked to his wife, and she said, well, go to the sage, who's an 8-hour horse ride, the great sage in that area. And sages are from all faiths, so this is not about any one faith. So he said, all right, I'll go. So he got on his horse, and of course he fell asleep riding the horse, but the horse knew how to get there, of course. That's how these tales go. And so he gets there, and it's a larger town, and the place where the sage was in a house what most of us would call a hovel. It was a ugly old house, and it had lots of people talking and drinking and smoking. So he goes in and he says, I'm here to see. We know. So they scurry him back to see the sage. And he tells the sage the story. Now, the sage is so old, he thinks he's asleep through the whole story. And he talks to the sage, and the sage listens and realizes what's at stake. So all of a sudden, the sage wakes up, and he has these clear blue eyes, and he looks at him. And he says, okay. He says, repeat this on the way home, and everything will be fine. He says, well, what should I? Everything is for the good. Even rats are for the good. So he says to himself, God, I went all the way here to give this man this money and to contribute. He said, but my wife said, this is what I need to do. So he gets back on the horse, falls asleep. And of course, the horse knew how to get home. And when he shows up, he's covered with dust and it's too late to go home and clean up. So he goes into the court. And the court, of course, is a building that all the windows are closed and it's very dark in more ways than one. And if you know, the European system was an inquisitorial system, which meant that the prosecutor and the judge were more together than they are in our system. So what happened was, briefly, is all the witnesses who were going to come testify didn't show up. And they called their names one by one because they're all drunks. They didn't show up. So the judge, with his long bony finger, says, come here to the prosecutor. He whispers to him, he says, go get the affidavits. That'll be enough to put him in jail. So they wait. Secretary comes back with tears in her eyes. She comes up to the bench. She opens her hands, and there's just little pieces of paper. The rats ate them. Hope you enjoy that. Thank you.
Thank you, Roy. Thank you so much. Okay, it's always fantastic to have all of you come up to the podium and celebrate ideas that you have and give reflections. So please continue to do that as we go through the weeks and months ahead. Birthdays, we have Steve Wicks. Happy birthday for Sunday. Last Sunday was Steve's birthday, as well as Bob Zaltzberg was yesterday. So happy birthday to them both. And member anniversaries, John Armstrong has been with us for a year. It's amazing, and it's wonderful to have him. So there's a round of applause for all of them. Thank you. We have guests today. So Michelle Cohen, if you want to just join me here. And then Joy's going to mention if anybody's online as well.
Okay, we've got Susan Sandberg, guest of Jim Shea. If you would stand and be recognized when I call your name. Liesl Record, also guest of Jim Shea. Yay. Etienne Barnard, guest of James Wolfe. And finally, Sam Udek, guest of Susie Graham.
Thank you so much, Michelle. Joey, do we have anybody online?
Alon, we don't have any guests, but I do want to recognize that Judy Schroeder is joining us on Zoom.
Oh, great. Fantastic. Thank you so
Okay.
much. And
Okay.
we'll talk about Judy in a moment. Yeah. And Susan, I want to just thank you so much for all of your service to the Bloomington community on the council. And now as a mayoral candidate, it's really great to have you with us here. Yeah. Okay. And talking about Judy, our thoughts are with Judy. I don't know if you all know, but Judy's wonderful husband in Montgovin, I hope I can pronounce his last name correctly, since it's French. He passed away last Friday. And so we're thinking of Judy. I saw Judy over the weekend, and I believe that she's doing fine. She's got both her son and daughter with her. And there's a memorial planned for March 18th at 10 a.m. at St. Paul's Catholic Church. So I hope that you can all join us there. There's a really wonderful obituary for Ed as well, which we will circulate on the roundabout. I just saw it this morning. Really wonderful man, incredible life. The Herald Times also carried an announcement of the passing of Ken Sparks. I don't know if you remember the name Ken Sparks. He was past president of both the Salvation Army and the Bloomington Rotary Club. And so we wish his family well. We're thinking of Jim Shea. Your wife, Patty, had a heart attack recently. We're having you in our thoughts as well. Hopefully she's doing okay. Yeah. She's doing good. That's good to hear. And then switching gears, I'm going to mention that we do have news of the 9th Rotary Toast. A decision has been made and accepted. Judge Stephen Galvin will be our celebrated honoree. And he has chosen CASA, the Monroe County Court-Appointed Special Advocates Group, as the recipient of the generosity from that event. So this year's the first 8 years, this is the 9th toast, but the first 8 years has generated proceeds of more than $330,000 for local charities. Pretty amazing. So we look forward to, yeah, thank you. Talking about big projects, we've got Jeff McKim with us here, and we're going to be sending you more information about the district grant. We would love for you to share ideas. We'd like for you to tell your friends, partners, people who you think would be appropriate partners for the Bloomington Rotary Club to join us in this effort next year. We're looking for ideas. And the deadline for ideas has been extended to March 24th, I believe it is, in 2 weeks' time, right? So we'll be sending you information about that in the roundabout, and also one of my infrequent emails to you. When I need to get things going, I have to send out that email every now and then. So we have a Chipotle fundraiser this evening for the Rotaract Club. Information's on your desk. So if you're hungry this evening and you want to go to Chipotle for dinner, the proceeds of that will go to disaster relief in Turkey. I also want to thank Teresa Clare so much for your leadership of the food volunteering that we did, the Hoosier Hills Food Bank, and also to the many, many members of this club who were involved. Yes, I think that deserves a round of applause. That was really fantastic. And I'm going to jump over the names just for time, because we're thinking about getting through these announcements here. And Susie Graham, I believe that you've got a quick announcement here for the Rotary International Giving. Yeah.
Walking slowly. That's all right. Hello, Rotary friends. It's great to see you today. So I'm here representing the Bloomington, excuse me, I lied. I'm here representing the Rotary International Foundation. I serve on that committee with Peggy Frisbee and several others. Mike Baker is here with us today. Wanted to give you a heads up. Next week, you're going to be receiving a different email from the one that Alain is going to send you. And it is going to include a very, very brief survey that we would encourage you to take. 4 questions that were put together by Yolanda Trevino, helping us assess how well we're doing our job with the Rotary International Foundation Committee, because it's important that we continue to elevate an awareness of the foundation, what the impact of your dollars looks like, and if we are moving the needle with our club locally. So just a heads up, look for that email. Just do that survey right away. Bob's your uncle. You'll be on your way. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Susie. Thank you very much. And I believe that we do actually have time for happy dollars, just a few of them. So if anybody wants to, either online or in the room, talking about, we've got Liz Feitel here, is our first person.
I'm happy to promote a few things for my Fourth Locker. This is a little add-on you can do to all your add-on things for clothing and that sort of thing. I can talk to you about that. We also have products like the thermos that can be added on to and printed on, as well as the mugs. So I'll give a little few dollars for that.
Great, excellent. Yeah, we've got a number of people in the room here. Michael Shermis is going to run around giving us.
Kudos to the Bloomington Symphony Orchestra, who mounted a gorgeous concert the other night. Certainly an organization that should be loved and financed.
Yeah, fantastic. I was there. It was amazing.
We have another discount opportunity at the Buzzkirk Chumley Theater. I put little postcard sized things on your on the table. So take one if you're interested. $10 off on the Town Mountain performance on March 23rd. It's country and bluegrass.
Oh, that's great. Anybody online with something that they would like to share?
Yes, I give $5 for the celebration of early spring. We never had anything like it. the colors of the shrub and the trees with the flowering bushes, magnificent.
Great. Thanks, Raj. It's great to see you always.
I've got $5 happy because my grandson can finally say granddad.
That's so fantastic. Yeah.
I've got 20 happy dollars because I am happy that we're on our way to getting our 20 volunteers that we need for habitat build. These are all on your tables. If you haven't signed up and you're able to work on an indoor workday, please do that. And then we also added at the bottom an opportunity to provide lunch if you can't, wield a paintbrush or swing a hammer. You can help provide lunch or donate money to do that. If you're technologically challenged, come see me and I'll try to get you set up. So I'm happy about that.
Thank you, Michelle. And thank you so much for your leadership on that project. We have 2 more here at the table. And then we'll end with Charlotte.
Oh, I got a couple bucks. My son came down to spend the weekend with Melissa and I, and just really nice to see the little poop head. So.
And that's great.
Hello, everyone. I have a few dollars. First of all, I've been traveling a little bit, but I'm so glad to see my colleague, Susan Sandberg, here today. Just kind of makes me smile. But what I really wanted to say is this month is my wedding anniversary. My wife and I will be celebrating our 44th.
Wow, fantastic. Good.
Okay, I'm going to contribute $25 for my granddaughter Alice's birthday, which is March 16th, I believe. And she's come to visit me, which is really a treat.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, so good first.
Fantastic. Thank you, Charlotte. Thank you so much. Thank you. And you might have noticed that I'm feeling pretty relaxed at the podium today. I wonder why. Somebody in the room has arrived who might be helping us with leadership in the future. And that somebody's name is Ron Barnes. Welcome back. It's really great to have you. Yes, he's been in, yeah. So Ron has been, thank you. Ron has been in Florida for a while, and I was just wondering if he would make it back. So that's great, yeah. Good, okay. So I think we're ready to host our guest who's gonna be, Jim Shea is gonna be welcoming our guest today.
Hello, Rotarians in the room and Zoomlanders. I am delighted to introduce Katy Borner to you today. She's a friend and former colleague of mine from the Letty School of Informatics, Computing and Engineering. Katy is a native of Germany, where she achieved a master's degree in engineering and electronics at the University of Technology, Leipzig, and a PhD in computer science at the University of Kaiserslautern. She came to IU in '98 and has risen to the rarefied ranks of distinguished professor. She's the Victorine Professor of Engineering and Information Science at IU's Letty School. She's also a fellow of the American Association of the Advancement of Science and also the Association for Computing Machinery. Closer to home in 2019, she was named the inaugural Ada Lovelace Award winner by the city of Bloomington in recognition of her contributions to science, technology, engineering, art, and math, STEAM. She is the founding director of the Center for Cyber Infrastructure for Network Science, which employs a full-time and part-time staff of 70. And I questioned myself and I had to recount that number when I was doing it on the web. That includes 5 PhD students. So she's an economic development engine for IU and the Letty School. She's of course done TED Talks, and she's also presented at the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland. She's written many articles and a number of books and is well known for her Atlas of Science books. Now, how many of you have been to Letty Hall and seen the Amatrea sculpture? Show of hands, about half the room.
Well, Katy was instrumental in bringing that to IU. And when we were building Luddy Hall, I was one of the leads on the development team. And Katy said, we'd like to have a meeting. I'd like to introduce you to this guy who I've met. His name was Philip Beasley. I said, great, we're open for ideas for the building. And so she set up a meeting, but not in her office, not in my office, not in any of the meeting rooms that we had, the many meeting rooms. We met in Woodburn Hall, which was a little bit unusual. But when I got there, I was delighted to see that we were meeting in the former office of Nobel Prize winner Lynn Ostrom. And so it was a thrill for me to be able to see that office. And we had a lot of good thoughts around what Philip Beasley could bring to IU. And then my job became to take this idea of, we want to put a glass sculpture on the 4th floor that's full of electronic stuff to the IU bureaucracy, which eventually bought it. So after that meeting, I spent a couple of days thinking, why did we meet in Lynn Ostrom's office? And finally, I had an obvious aha moment. Katy is setting a big vision for what this is going to be. And so I am delighted, and I hope you give a warm Rotary welcome to Katy Borner, a scientist with big vision.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's really, really nice to see you all here, to see some familiar faces, to see some new faces, and to see you all well. I think this is still a pandemic time, and I appreciate that some of you still have masks. I can't see you, but that's okay. Keep them on, because there is also flu and other things going on. I hope the online participants can also hear me well. If you have any problems, let us know. It's my great pleasure to introduce some of the work to you that our team has been able to do. And Liesl Record, she's also here. She is my right hand, maybe right and left hand in some cases. And we have been doing many of the exhibit items that I'm going to present on together. And the exhibit is now 18 years old. So it's getting there. It's almost legal. And not in Germany, it would be, and in America, maybe it takes a little longer. And it's just really wonderful to have many people be part of that effort, but also to have many benefit from the maps of science, technology, education, job market landscapes, teaching landscapes that we now have hang at Indiana University. Those of you which made it to Luddy Hall have probably seen some of the maps hanging on the walls there. There's also the chemistry library, which currently has them on display. So if you want to stop by there, it's a very nice display of the archival maps that we also have in the IU library holdings. And what I will do is to just guide you a little bit through the exhibit, how it came into existence, but also how it evolved over the last 18 years and what might come next. And I believe if I click one of these, it goes forward and the other one probably backwards, but we just want to go forward for now. So as part of the exhibit, we had many people ask us for more information about the maps. After 10 years, we had collected 100 maps, and oftentimes people come to a library or a public museum or a national academy, and they out of nowhere see those 100 maps. And of course, if you take just 1 minute per map, which doesn't seem like a lot, it's still 100 minutes. And oftentimes people don't have so much time. So the idea came up to create books which come with the maps. And so there's an entire trilogy now in existence, which features the maps, the initial 100 maps. And there's the Atlas of Science, the Atlas of Knowledge, and the Atlas of Forecasts. And there's actually a big box there, which we can unpack if you would like to see them. But as part of the exhibit, we now also have interactive data visualizations. And those will be in a fourth atlas, which Liesl Record and Todd Theriold and myself are editing. And
that should come out for Christmas 2025, if you plan so far ahead. So let me first start with visualizations of science. Could I see a show of hands of how many of you have seen the maps, either in the chemistry library or in Luddy Hall? All right, so I will do a little bit more on that. So again, that is the Atlas Trilogy, which actually comes in a really nice bounded box, because MIT Press thought, oh, that would be a nice way of presenting it to alumni and to others. And as you see, each book is about 8 years of work. So ultimately, you get a lot of information on what happened during those 8 years. And it's not just me, it's also a lot of other experts coming together, being part of workshops, being map makers, being map users, and ultimately contributing to the exhibit by reviewing maps, by bringing it to many, many places. And so here, this was one of the very first events where we had the maps on display in 2006 at the American Geographers meeting in Denver, Colorado. This was the very first time that these maps appeared in a framed fashion. And map makers were very, very proud of seeing their maps on display this way. Since then, it has gone to many, many places, including the Center of Disease Control in Atlanta, Georgia, Duke University of Durham. I think some of you might be familiar with some of these places, but also in Miami, Florida, and many, many other places also abroad, where typically we have printed poster versions, because it's pretty hard to get the framed maps to go through customs and back. So as you see here, the first decade, we invited really anyone around the globe to contribute static maps. And then let's say 40, 50 maps got submitted, and then an international advisory board picked the top 10 maps. And those were then revised so that they can be understood by more general audiences, and also framed ultimately to fit into the normal format of the exhibit, and then put on display in many, many different places. So as you see, we had more than 390 by now display menus, so we should update that. For the second decade, we focused on interactive data visualizations, and that decade is still going on. And in fact, you have a kiosk there, which Lisa brought all the way over from Luddy Hall, which you can use to interact with these interactive data visualizations. And here, each year, we have 4 interactive visualizations that you can zoom in and get details on demand, and search for terms that might be of particular relevance to you. And again, this exhibit could not exist without the many map makers that make the maps, without the reviewers that review them, without the ambassadors for the exhibit, which bring the exhibit to many, many places. And so here now you see one map, and I think there should be fine text underneath, which is maybe cut off because of the Zoom session here, which has information on the map makers and the year in which the map was published. So the slides can be shared, so this way you would have all the information later on. What you see here is a map of scientific collaborations, and you see that it's a very global enterprise. People really do collaborate more with those that are close by, because they have coffees together, they have other events together, like this one here, and they might get inspired to do a paper or 2 together. But you also see that there is a very strong network really going around the entire globe, connecting us in different topic areas to each other, and hopefully also helping with some of the diplomacy, which is very urgently needed if there are wars raging in certain parts of our planet. Here you see a topic map of NIH grants, which was created in 2007. So you can take all the awards that NIH has been giving out in 2007, and you would cluster them and group them so that those which have similar term usage, similar words, that they are closer in space. And then you get this clustered circular map, which you see here in the middle. And what you can then do is to highlight funding by a certain institute, for instance, the National Cancer Institute or the NIGMS Institute. You can also enter search keys, and you would get to see who has what kind of funding, because you can click on these dots and get more information on the title and authors of that particular award. Ultimately, you can also upload a new abstract of projects that you would like to have funding for and see if it was recently funded, if there are others you might like to collaborate with. And of course, if you're a program officer, you might like to read in that abstract to find out who could potentially review that proposal. And so this is a visualization that's ultimately very useful for those which just want to understand what is funded currently and how it evolves over time as you bring in more data. But you can also overlay all of your own funding and maybe see your career trajectory over the funding landscape of the National Institutes of Health. You can then also use it to pick reviewers or to see if there are other collaborators possible. You might also like to enter keywords, and then again, in the lower two parts, you would see zooms into those areas which are particularly focused on those topics. Here you see the structure of all of science. Back when this map was created, it was the most comprehensive map of science ever created. Kevin Boyack and Dick Lavens, both authors of this map, they will come back here to Bloomington, Indiana in July, because we are bringing the International Conference on Scientometrics and Informetrics here to our campus. It hasn't been to the US for 17 years. Typically, this conference goes to major capitals such as Rome and Berlin and Rio and other places, because that's where all the science policymakers are. Interestingly, we have here at Indiana University 150 network scientists, and we also have 17 researchers which create maps of science and do informetrics, bibliometrics, and webometrics studies. And so because of this enormous capital and expertise that we have here, the exhibit will come to Bloomington, Indiana, even though it's not a World Cup leading capital. But I think it will still bring a lot of science policymakers and researchers here to campus. Starts on July 3rd, goes, opens officially with a big bang on July 4th, as you can imagine, and then runs through July 5. So there's more information on this later in the slides. But here in this map of science, the map is rotated and mirrored in a way that mathematics, as the purest science, is on the top. And as you go around this kind of ring of science in a clockwise fashion, you come over to from mathematics to the physical sciences, then over to chemistry and biology, biochemistry, then over to the medical sciences, also general medicine, radiology, and then ultimately over also to the mathematics and computational sciences. It's a little appendix to law, but then back to mathematics, and right underneath mathematics is computer science, which really now interconnects many of the sciences, including also with engineering. Happy to report that we now have an accredited engineering program at Indiana University Bloomington. We're very, very proud of that, and it actually attracts a lot of students, but also faculty and expertise that is absolutely needed by other sciences. So we have nice collaborations now with other researchers in the biomedical sciences, but also, of course, chemistry and biology, and others that really have to build their own devices to see something that nobody has been able to see before them. So if you now have a map of all science, you can again overlay your career trajectory. Where were you trained? Where did you do your major work? Where did you retire? You could also overlay the funding that has been awarded, if you have a way to match it based on keywords, for instance. You could overlay what kind of teaching is done across the sciences. You could overlay who gets the most money or the least money. That's oftentimes a very sad picture. And you can also, of course, search for very interdisciplinary topics, such as pharmacogenomics or proteomics or nanotechnology, which back then was a rather small field, but now has been growing enormously. You can do similar base maps for patents here for the US patent hierarchy. So as some of you might know, the USPTO classification system is up to 17 levels deep. Here only the first 3 levels were mapped. And so you go from apparel in the top left to whatever ends with Z in the lower right. And you have that carpet in the middle. And you can now take a specific patent and you can pull it out and you will see what it cites or what it is cited by. You can also overlay patent holdings and intellectual property claims by IBM or by Apple or by Microsoft or any of your favorite companies, really, to see what kind of claims they have. And you can then also look at personal patent holdings and see if there are patent mills potentially in the mix. And so this is a very interesting exercise, not just for librarians, which have to keep this patent classification system in balance, but also for those which really want to understand who owns what kind of area. Here we did a map of Wikipedia, the English-speaking Wikipedia, and in blue and green and yellow, you see math, science, and technology. As you might realize, there are a lot of good pieces of information and knowledge and wisdom encoded in Wikipedia pages. Many use Wikipedia extensively to just make sense of any kind of information you got from a doctor's office, or when you want to read a new paper that has a lot of terms that you might not be familiar with, you can go there as well. And it's really wonderful to have that Wikipedia in our lives, and I hope you all donate regularly there. I think it's needed. Because it ultimately helps many people understand science, technology, math in better ways than they could without. It also then can be used to understand which articles get added and erased quite frequently. For instance, if you look at abortion, very often totally wiped out, then brought into existence again, totally wiped out, brought into existence again. Shouldn't happen. You should use the discussion forum instead. But not everybody reads the fine print, I guess. You will also get to see which articles are most heavily downloaded. There are bursts of activity around certain anniversaries, certain events that happen in the world. And so it's quite interesting to just see what the world cares about. And if you do this across languages, it's super interesting to see that some cultures care deeply about famous people in sports, whereas other people care deeply about politicians, and other languages again care deeply about rock stars. So it's actually quite culture dependent on what you think are the most famous people and most relevant people in your life. This is a map of science fiction. I'm actually curious, how many of you still read books and read science fiction books? All right, good. I mean, you can also read them, of course, on a Kindle, then you can make text really big. This is good. Don't have to reveal that you might need glasses. But here you have a map of science fiction books that's rendered by hand by Bocelli, who also visits here regularly because he has a high school friend here in town. And so Bocelli, typically in New York, he has done a lot of these kind of hand-drawn maps, and they're for sale. So you might like to check them out online. But in this particular map, if you are finding a book that you already like, then you might also like the book that's mentioned next to it. It's kind of like Amazon, where as you buy more of a type of book, you get more and more recommendations for similar books, or Netflix for that matter, or any of the other streaming services which try to keep your attention forever. So here you can then go and explore that in detail. And in fact, all of these maps are available online, and you can zoom into them and zoom in more and zoom in more, because oftentimes they're printed in 300 dpi in large format, and your screen might be smaller, and it has only 72 dpi, dots per inch. So you really can zoom quite a bit to reach the resolution these maps exist at. So now coming over to the second decade of the exhibit. These are interactive data visualizations that you can step up to. So there's a kiosk over there, and you would then pick one of those maps and start exploring that data. Some of these maps are fed with real-time data, and some have near real-time data sets behind, and others have canned data sets which come out of a database which is not updated. So in the kiosk, you have an interface like this where you can browse through the different iterations. You can then also pick one of those maps. Here you have a smelly map, which shows one city. There are actually multiple cities that you can pick from. Does anyone recognize this city? Not Paris. London is right. Yes, River Thames going through it. And what was done here is to take tweets from people that have their geolocations on to see what they tweet about in which kind of areas of the city. And what you see here on the right-hand side is different types of smells that are mapped. So for instance, the orange one is animal smell, and you see the London Zoo in that white area, which is highlighted. You also have nature smells and all the wonderful gardens and parks that you have in London. You have food smells, and some of you might recognize the areas where you prefer to have your restaurant picked in the evening. You also have waste smells. And so you can now explore this map by going for the smells. That's why it's called smelly maps. And you could also pick Barcelona or any of the other big cities you might have near and dear to your hearts. But you also see below a map that looks at sentiments such as anger and anticipation, disgust, fear, joy, sadness, surprise, or trust. And if you're a city planner, you might be interested to have cities that gives you a lot of joy and happiness. And you might like to see what places are giving you not so good emotions and try to do something so that that changes in the future. So it's actually quite interesting to then see not just where all the emissions are, that's all the red areas, which basically are the bridges, because that's where all the traffic goes over all the time, but also to see what areas are joyful areas. So maybe next time you plan your trip to London, go to the joyful and happy places. This is a map of mega regions in the US. It uses data from before the pandemic, when some workers had to commute for 2 hours in the morning to get to their workplace, and then 2 hours in the evening to get back home. That might not be the case anymore now. I think many people have found a way to work from home or to have shorter commutes. But what you then can do based on the commute patterns is that you can redraw the boundaries of the different states of the US. And so for instance, in the state of Indiana, you would have Gary, where lots of people commute into Chicago in the morning and back in the evening, become part of Illinois because of the commute patterns that exist there. Similarly, you can also just zoom into other areas and explore that in detail. And you can also click on these clusters of commute networks to see how far they spread and how long commutes some people actually have to do. So please do use the opportunity to play on the kiosk with this particular visualization. It's called Mega Regions. So again, this would not be possible without Liesl, which is right here, and Todd Serial, who is here in the photo. We also have an exhibit advisory board, which brings a lot of expertise from geography, from the learning sciences, from digital arts and humanities, but also from many different places on our planet, because data visualizations are done differently in different countries, and they're also perceived differently. How many more minutes do I have? Okay. Yeah, that would be wonderful. Yeah. So for those of you which make macroscopes, we have always submission deadlines. So the one for this year has passed, but there will be one more iteration for interactive data visualizations. So if you have seen a visualization that really you thought is actionable for you, you can actually do something differently because you now have seen that data in a new way. Please point them to the exhibit and encourage them to submit. The deadlines are always the same. So next year it will probably be around February 15th, 2024, that we get new exhibit submissions submitted, typically on the very last day. It's just what it is. And then before I end, I wanted to leave you with the understanding that it's not just analyzing and mapping old data that we now can do, it's also the possibility to apply different computational predictive models, such as network models, such as differential equation models, such as agent-based models, to try to predict what might happen if we fund a certain team, if we support a certain effort, if we build a certain road or bridge. And all of these efforts, you can now actually try to figure out what would happen using these predictive models. And so in the Atlas of Forecasts, there are 10 different computational predictive models that are introduced that all have been applied one way or another to predict changes and different futures in science, technology, education, job markets, but also education landscapes. And it's super interesting then to have different stakeholders come together around these round tables and start discussing if this is the future you want, or if you want something different. And you can always try to rerun the model. You oftentimes can't rerun reality, but if this is a predictive model, then you can actually see what is likely the outcome for certain types of actions that you personally can take. Sometimes you can't take the real actions that would be needed, but you can always try in your environment to do the right actions. And then it percolates up if you're good. But then ultimately pick or use these models to get us to desirable futures, because there are many, many dystopian and highly undesirable futures. And I think we all have to find a way to communicate to each other what kind of future we want together and how we can best get there. And really communicate this not just among scientists, but also to science policymakers, to industry, and to many, many others, which all have to pull together to make this a reality. So thanks so much for the opportunity to present. I would be happy to answer questions. And again, Lisa's also right here.
Anybody online?
Sure. I enjoyed your story, by the way. Really enjoyed it.
Anybody else see that? Did that strike you too, that it looked that way? What do you think? Why?
I think it's an octopus, right? With a lot of wormholes and stuff. Yeah.
What do we have to do to make this a better world with all that?
I think you have to capture good data. And I think IU is actually getting really good in capturing data that matters, adding it to a spread dashboards that many can see, and ultimately acting on that data. So I think data-driven decision-making is really important. The other part that's really important is to bring many different stakeholders together. I love to see the diversity in age here. I love to see the diversity in backgrounds. I love to see that there are different ethnicities here. This is a good team. There are many, many teams out there which are still white male. It's just what it is. And that's not so good of an environment. I think we really want it's a future that is good for all of us. And that requires that you get data from all of us, that all of us have a seat on the table, that all of us can help pick desirable futures, and that all of us get to implement it together.
So are there any maps that you really want, or like what would be your dream thing to map out, or what are you looking for and hoping to get data to map out?
Very great question. In the exhibit, I believe we have captured over the 10 years that this took to get to 100 maps. I think we have captured major changes in access to data, access to real-time data, size of data, right? Data really increased exponentially in that time when we had these initial 10 years. And also advances in how these maps can be rendered for general audiences. I think many of us are very comfortable with bar graphs and scatter plots. Even though scatter plots, for some, it's hard to do a regression line in there. It's not necessarily that everybody can do this. We work very closely with science museums, and we can therefore run very general audiences through surveys, which just ask them to name a data visualization and then to also read a data visualization. In some cases, we even ask them to make a data visualization. And I think the data visualization literacy has actually massively increased because of COVID, because everybody got to see the flatten the curve, right? So that was good. Everybody got to see logarithmic axes, which from what I understand are now forbidden in some courtrooms in the US because most people can't read them, which is kind of, maybe that's really needed then. But ideally, it would be taught better, right? So I think to answer your question, I'm happy with the set of maps we have, but of course there are new maps created all the time, and many of them are interactive. And that's why we have the second decade, which really looks at interactive data visualizations. Yeah, online, would somebody have a question? Happy to answer that as well.
More?
You mentioned the possibility of dystopian futures. What would it take to use one of your maps to crash the power grid of a major metropolitan city?
So there are some data visualizations which PhD students have been working on, and they were so insightful that these PhD students couldn't get their PhD anymore. They were taken away and locked up and never be seen again by normal populations. If you are a professor, you should try to guide your students away from these kind of topics. I think that's not a good topic for a PhD. You can do that when you're tenured, right? Don't do that before. In terms of dystopian futures, I think this is a long discussion. There are many, many elements that go into arriving at dystopian futures. It's typically not just one map, it's also the stories that goes with it and the way it's introduced and who is introducing it, where and when. So I believe there is the narrative that goes with a data visualization that also is very, very impactful. And hopefully we don't have to talk about dystopian futures, but I'm much more interested to talk about good futures.
I wanted to know about, talking about impact, I wanted to know about impact of the maps you have. There might be a story there you could share.
Yeah, there are many, many stories. In fact, many of the maps were picked because they already had a real world impact at the moment when we added them to the exhibit. So this was not because of the exhibit. Maybe it got emphasized because of it, but ultimately there are many maps which, for instance, led to traffic patterns being changed so that some endangered species didn't get run over. Let's say it's ship traffic, right? And there are whales which are trying to have offsprings in that area. So you can oftentimes just go a few more miles extra, but then avoid major disaster to endangered species. You can also look at what areas are funded well or where the training is happening in the right way. Ultimately, what you want is you have an educational landscape, you have the job market landscape, and you want the education to serve the jobs that really need to be filled. And underneath, you have science and technology developments, right? So education is actually in the middle. So you want to have new science and technology developments to come into classrooms, but also be relevant for jobs that exist. And that is something that as a teacher, I have to optimize almost every day because, or definitely every year, because it's changing so quickly what is known to us and what is needed in the job landscape. Thank you.
Thank you, Katy. And it's extraordinary to see somebody who focuses on maps and data to be so wise. It's really, because, you know, because, you know, it's almost sort of like it shifts into that sort of spiritual zone, or the, you know, the greater questions of why we exist and how we exist, which is illuminated by these absolutely extraordinary maps. So thank you so much for being with us. Really, really very special. Next week, well, actually, before I do that, I want to acknowledge and thank a few people. Michelle Cohen, thank you so much for introducing our guests. Joy Harder, always on Zoom. Roy, thank you so much for that reflection. It was great. I'm going to remember that for a while. And Marilyn Wood, she's going to be our reporter for the month. And a special shout out to Tyler, who has sorted out the audio issues in this room and on Zoom. So thank you so much, Tyler, for all of your hard work. It's really fantastic. Okay, so we'll be meeting again in the Georgian room and on Zoom next week. I won't be here. I will be in New York. My daughter is giving a performance there, so I'm going to go out there and enjoy it. But I'm very excited to know that Teresa Clare is going to be leading our meeting next week, which is very exciting. And next week will be featured will be Dr. Cook, who he will also be on Zoom. And he's the author of the recent book that the book club read, which is Canary in the Coal Mine. Austin, Indiana was ground central for the epidemic, and so many things that happened there, which were amazingly written about in that book. So I suggest that all of you read it if you can. So with that, let's do our four-way test, and please join me. Of the things we think, say, or do, first, is it the truth? Second, is it fair to all concerned? Third, will it build goodwill and better friendships? Fourth, will it be beneficial to all concerned? And fifth, have a fantastic week, everybody. And enjoy the beautiful buds.